Good evening and welcome to Bread for the Journey. This is our webinar series that's been going on for many weeks. And tonight I am honored to welcome Dr. Catherine Meeks, who is Executive Director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. Welcome and thank you so much for being with us.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
I want to give a little shout out to a few organizations in addition to St. Martin's Episcopal Church that sponsors this program and where I have the honor to be Associate Rector. I'm Lisa Green. We've made plans and are hoping, watching of course what's happening with COVID-19, but in September we're hoping to have Dr. Meeks in person. Co-sponsored by the Lemon Project at the College of William and Mary and All Together Williamsburg, which is a bridge building organization that's been around for 25 years, and also the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Virginia and its Repairers of the Breach Task Force. So a shout out to all of those possible attendees tonight, and also to our friends at St. Cyprian's Episcopal Church in Hampton, which is a sister congregation that we did a program almost 20 years ago with called Rowing Together to Overcome Racism. So I had put out a special invitation to them as well. So that's just to give a little sense of the wider communion of saints who are maybe joining us tonight, and welcome to all of you. So, Catherine, I'd like to ask you maybe just to start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to this work.
Oh, all right. Well, I was born in El Dorado, Arkansas, and I lived there till I was, I think, 5 years old, and moved up to the northeastern part of the state. And then I lived there till graduating from high school, went to college in California. And in the process of being in Los Angeles, I really learned a lot about the ways in which America is constructed and systemic racism. Even though I had those experiences as a child in Arkansas, I don't think I'd had any real ability to name most of what our experiences were. And I went to college in California and then moved to Georgia, which is so strange because when I left Arkansas at 18, I said I would never coming back to the South again. And then I moved to Georgia. So, you know, you should be very, very careful saying what you won't ever do, because God always has something else in mind and you get to eat your words. So I've lived in Georgia now for almost 50 years. I've graduated my PhDs from Emory University, and I was a college professor for over 30 years, and now working for the Episcopal Church, running the Center for Racial Healing, which is a collaborative project between the Diocese of Atlanta and Bishop Michael Curry, and we are mandated by that partnership to be a resource for the church in terms of helping to be a catalyst for the church in doing the work of racial healing and dismantling racism. And I feel incredibly grateful to have this opportunity to do that work that I feel so deeply called to do.
I first heard of you, I think, when I was one of the founding members of the Social Justice Commission in the Diocese of Western Massachusetts. And we were kind of restarting what had been anti-racism training, in the past, and trying to develop something that felt a little more life-giving to people. And one of our members was aware of your work, and specifically, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, how it's not just a question of receiving skills or kind of checking off boxes, but it's really a kind of spiritual formation.
I think I was saying earlier today to somebody that this work, it's not social justice work. It's not anything that's extraneous to being a Christian. It's our responsibility as people of faith to be about racial healing and dismantling racism. It is what the church's work is related to. And we have approached the work a lot of times as if it's extraneous to that, as if there's a mission over here for the church to be about spiritual things. And then there's this social justice issue we need to work on because we've got racism in the land. Well, the real truth is doing this work is about being the church. And for individuals to engage in it is, I deeply believe, about our spiritual formation, about our call to become spiritually well people. And so when I was asked to do lead the commission for dismantling racism in this diocese before we had the center, and we were doing this training of the mandated training of what we used to call anti-racism training. We did it as if we were a corporation rather than a church. And we did it as if it had nothing to do really with the overall longevity of our lives as people of faith. And so when I was asked to start doing this work, I said, we need to do this work as if we're people of faith. And so the very first thing we did in restructuring what we do was think about this as a part of our spiritual formation and put it under that kind of umbrella, and then add the Eucharist to the training day to make sure people didn't miss the point. Mm-hmm. And it's one day. So it's a one day kind of parenthetical thing in your overall journey. You do one day of training or one day of participating in a workshop, and it better be about just being a part of a longer term set of goals you've got for yourself, because one day is not going to fix anything. Mm-hmm. And I wanted people to get over this notion that you go sit in a room for 8 hours and talk about race and you somehow are done with it. Mm-hmm. You check off the box and you have fulfilled a requirement to be on the vestry or to be a priest or to be whatever in terms of race. Well, the truth is, if it's a part of your spiritual formation, it's a part of your spiritual life and well-being, then it's a lifetime thing. And that one day is just a little piece of that. So that has been very transformative, actually, to put it underneath that umbrella, to make that claim of this work being about our ongoing lives has been really transformative. And I think that people of faith wanted to hear that message and didn't maybe even realize that so much, that they wanted to hear that message, because it was clear that even though you've done that day and gone on, that the work in the world of trying to create spaces where racism was not pervasive and not ruining the possibilities of the quality of life of so many people, that didn't change just because you took that one day of training. And so I think people were always, at least thoughtful people and progressive people, were not happy with that, but didn't really know what to do about it. Mm. And so what I try to do and what the center does, and what everybody that I talk to, I want to tell, is that this is ongoing work, and it's about the way in which you live in the world. If you become a resistor to a system of oppression as a person of faith, because that's a part of what you are as a person of faith, and not because it's some kind of extraneous justice issue over here that you can go in and out with. You can't go in and out with this. It's got to be always you're always a resistor every day, because that's what it. Just like you're always a person of faith. I mean, you don't ever get done with that, and you have to work on the racism the same way you would work on not wanting to go to war or not wanting to have children mistreated. I mean, it's a part of the whole fabric. So, and that's really been amazing to me, to watch the difference in the energy and how the work has grown in a very organic way. that I have been privileged to do because of making that distinction of it as our spiritual part of our spiritual journey.
It feels as though it's been a kind of transformative period in the whole Episcopal Church as well, and with the conceiving of the larger project of building beloved community, that all of these things work together in different ways.
I think I really want people to be careful about all of our language and what we're saying and what we're getting after, and do we even know what we're talking about, and do we know what we're asking for? So when people talk about beloved community and reconciliation and all those kinds of things, and I want to always say, think about that. Think about what you're saying. Think about, when we talk about having beloved community, I'm not so sure that we always even understand what we're talking about, or we understand the journey that it takes to get there. I think we have some notion in mind that if we're meeting and reading a book on race, that somehow that's beloved community. For me, there's a whole bunch of healing around race that has to happen, and until that happens, there's no chance that there's going to be beloved community. What we do is we do the work, and we create the possibility for something to be transformed, for a new idea to be born, and then God brings that new idea if we have done our work, and when we are really open to the long-term work of working on healing. And so I find that that it's so important to always keep at the forefront of all the conversations the necessity for vigilance, which means that it's lifetime. It's a lifetime. I think you get done with it when we get rolled into the building for our Easter service at the end, so. And
I remember you saying somewhere, and maybe even after that, we'll still be.
That's right. I don't know what happens next, and I'm not going to get too into that because I'm kind of pretty busy with what's going on right now. So
yes, indeed, we were talking earlier about how when we arranged to have this conversation a few weeks ago, we had no idea of what would have been happening in the world, and it feels like such a tumultuous time and a tender time at the same time. And I'd be interested to hear you reflect specifically on what you see, kind of unfolding in our world and our society right now.
Well, it's it's so challenging. It's scary. It's unnerving. It's uncertain. There's reason to have hope, I think. There seems to be new light bulbs coming on in the tunnel as I watch people from all over the country and all over the world join us in standing up about police brutality and racism and oppression. So for somebody like me who's been doing this for 50 years, that's a hopeful sign. I have never seen this before, that the whole world was out having protests, marches in support of the people of color being oppressed in the United States. So that's a reason to have hope. But it's also incredibly sad. And I have two sons. And so I've had, like everybody else who's, I think, willing to allow themselves to be turned upside down about this, it's been a roller coaster of going first from the grief around COVID-19, and then seeing that as a modern day pandemic, and then thinking about racism as a historical pandemic that has just been here and won't go away. And then putting those things together and then thinking about the challenges to young people of color and their safety in terms of the police and all of that. So it's been a lot to navigate, and that's why I've done a lot of talking about lament and a lot of talking about grief, and as well as gratitude, because there are things to be grateful for, and there are a lot of things to grieve about. And it's been challenging for me personally trying to hold those things in my hands and really kind of honor them both.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's easy to get into really taking one or the other and trying to, maybe I'll just grieve and that's all I'll do, or I'll just be grateful and that's all I will do. And the challenge is to do both. And so I think that we as a people have a lot of grieving to do about the losses that we've experienced through the virus and all the people who've died and the ways in which our government has not dealt with this. I mean, there's a lot there to grieve about, but then we have a lot of things for which to be thankful as well. And so I'm trying. I hope we do both, so that as we move along, we can move along in a real way. We can go to the next place because we really did do what we were supposed to do in the present moment.
It feels related to me to what I've heard you say or read about how people are quick to jump to the idea of racial reconciliation, but your center is called the Center for Racial Healing, and is that connected to what you're saying about the need for lament and grief?
Yes, we think that we're doing. We even have the audacity to have Racial Reconciliation Sunday. So people, Black priests and white priests will swap pulpits, and people will have lunch together with the Black church, and the white church will get together for lunch. I think all those things are so ridiculous until they just make me want to cry, because they have got nothing to do. I mean, so you want to go eat lunch with some Black folks or white folks once a year, but don't call it anything, just go do it, because it's not about reconciliation. Is about restoring a relationship. And in terms of Black and whites in America, that relationship didn't ever exist. So there is no relationship to restore. You don't have relationships with slaves, you own them. And real relationships are rooted in equity. Equity of respect anyway, if nothing else. So you come together with somebody, and it's people who come together who respect each other as equal participants and partners. Or with your kids, kids are younger, so maybe there's some inequity there, but there's a great bit of respect and regard, and it's not the same thing as your dog or your cat. So in many ways the relationships between slaves and their owners was like that of pet and their owner. So nobody wants to restore that. So in order to have reconciliation, we need to work on the wounds, and then get past that, so that we can actually enter, as people of color, white and Black and brown people, into relationships based on a real sense of respect and regard and equity. So these people that we have worked on our issues, white people worked on their supremacy issues, and Black people have worked on their internalized oppression issues. And then we choose to come together with an understanding of who each person is. And we sort of make maybe an unspoken thing about being willing to accept each other, as we have come now as these two people with an understanding of our history and who we are. Then a relationship can emerge. But it's not a reconciliation, it's a new relationship. Mm-hmm. Because that relationship was never there. And so we don't use reconciliation in the name of the center. Pardon me, excuse me a second. We don't use that term in the name of the center, and we don't really talk about it much. We talk about healing, because healing is deeper, and it's a much better description of the process that has to happen for us to get to some place where race relations in this country changes and systemic racism is dealt a death blow so that it doesn't exist anymore.
I think you've basically been answering this question, but I got a question in the chat from David Benedict, who's one of our outreach commission members and a dean of social justice in the Williamsburg area. He says, what are the most critical impediments that make it difficult for Blacks and whites to walk together? enjoy a shared community and work together toward the common good, and how can those barriers be addressed?
Well, you know,
It's like
I
kind
think one of the,
of,
I'm sorry.
it sounded a lot like what you've just been talking about in terms of
Right.
the new relationship and the building of respect.
I think there's so much inequity in the level of respect. I mean, the whole idea, the idea of white skin privilege and white supremacy is so ingrained in the culture and so difficult to overcome. And Black people have internalized so much of the projection that has come out of that system, and that's hard to overcome as well. And it gets in the way unless people are waking up to those factors and doing something about it, and then actually having the willingness to name what's happening and to talk about it together. I think that Black and white people, particularly Black and white people, have to be willing to talk about both sides of this coin, and it's difficult to come to that place. And that's why I think the church is maybe the only place where that really can happen, because we have already committed to following Jesus. And so that gives us a platform to stand on, that and a mandate too, because I mean, I know that a lot of my dealing with my own not having white people as a real part of my life was the fact that I met some white people who showed me complete love unconditionally, and they taught me that I could love white people. And then came the willingness to be honest and to name how I felt and what was going on and to deal with it. And that's missing so much of the time. The connections between whites and Blacks are set up on such on foundations that are shaky and not really grounded in us telling the truth to each other. We'll act like we're doing that, but we don't do it to the extent that it needs to be done. So there's a real relationship and there's real acceptance of one another as equal people. And it's hard to overcome, because one of my actually white friends said, it's like a fish swimming in the water. It's just out there everywhere. This whole notion of supremacy, superiority, privilege, and it's hard to get away from it. And it's even hard to name sometimes. And so I think that may be the greatest hindrance. I think that white people have to see Black people as equal human beings, and that's difficult to see, and to know that that we're not that different, that we're human beings and we're all alike, and we're not some variant of something. And I mean, now I'm talking in big general terms, and not having this otherness that's so bad that you know, we can have the kinds of things we see in the country happening with the police, which comes out of that othering to the point of you don't even see this person as being connected to you in any kind of way. Mm-hmm. And whatever you do to them doesn't matter because they're not like you. And we've got to get past that. And I think Christians have a better chance of getting past it than anybody, because we already decided to follow God in a way that tells us we have to be open to being transformed. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to really be open to be transformed, then we can overcome the tendency toward othering people and not owning up to our own things in our own psyches that we need to be trying to get well of.
That reminded me a little bit of what I've read in your book about your study of Jung and the shadow, and someone asked if you could talk a little bit more about internalized oppression, and so I don't know if those things are connected in your mind, but
well, Jung has been very helpful to me in helping to explain the inner life. I mean, you know, what's inside of the inner, what I have come to call the inner community. And I didn't make that up. I mean, that's what he's actually talking about. So we have all these different parts of ourselves and different voices, different narratives. You can name it a lot of different ways, but that's been made up of the stories we've been told, the experiences we've had, and all of those kinds of things. And so part of our work is to get clarity about who lives in that community inside of us. And I really think the church could do a better job with teaching people about that inner community and how that inner community is in communication with the world outside, and having folks understand what creates reality, because we often think it's external to us and somebody else is doing something to us, when really a lot of it is our own insides, what's inside of us and what we're projecting out into the world. And so, and it's directly related to internalized depression, because for Black people, we've taken in a lot of the narratives that were told to us, by the white supremacy system of oppression. We took in some of those stories as if they were true, like not seeing ourselves as being equal and worthy. And some of the ways in which we behave with one another, even to this day, is really about having accepted those narratives from the narratives of oppression as being ours, rather than saying, well, that's how I'm seen, but that's not who I am. And you have to come to some place of being able to name that stuff. James Baldwin said that you may not be able to change everything that you can name, but you won't change anything that you don't name. And so, and I think a whole bunch of people a whole bunch of Black people have yet to name internalized oppression as something they struggle with. But it's there, it's real, it has to be named, it has to be encountered, and it has to be rooted out if you're going to be well. And it can be. It's not like you have to carry that for all of your life. So Jung's way of looking at the world really helps me with knowing that there's this community inside, and he would probably maybe talk about it in terms of the shadow. And it's and you end up living out of that, the energy that's generated by those different impulses inside yourself, and projecting that onto other people. If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know about it, and I mean, you do it even if you do know, but then at least when you know what's happening, and you can sit with yourself and say, I'm telling myself this story about that person, but I don't really know anything about that person. If you and the audience would think about, if you're driving down the road and you see somebody in a car, and it's a different kind of car from maybe what you just always see on the road, and you start telling yourself a story about who's driving it. But when you really think about it, you don't know a thing, because you don't know the person, you don't know anything about their story. So whatever you're saying to yourself, it's all about you. It's what you're making up. And when you catch yourself doing that, it's kind of funny to stop and say, you know what? Let me explore this a little bit, because I'm making this all up. And what is this about? And what does it say about me? It's kind of like your dreams. The dream is always about the dreamer. That somebody will say, I had a dream about you. And I just always chuckle, because I think, no, you had a dream and I was a character in your dream. But the dream is about you, because you're the one dreaming it. And every character in it, it represents a part of yourself. So we have the same things true with our inner community. And the more we can pay attention to that community, the better off we can be. And part of the inner community has, these stories, either the white supremacy story or the internalized depression story. And we've got to be trying to explore that and identify it and explore it, and then put it into the light of consciousness on both sides of the fence, both white supremacy and internalized depression, because that's what makes it get well, when we bring it to the light of consciousness and we name it and we deal with it. So then when we find ourselves responding out of that space, we can say, oh yeah, that's where that came from, and not blame it on somebody or project something onto somebody, and never own it for ourselves.
So is that part of how these these authentic relationships that we aspire to, and creating, a safe enough place to have those deeper conversations, is that what helps heal that? and is that partly how we start to recover?
I think that's right, Lisa. And that's why, that's why I want the church so much to be the place where this is a place where we bring our ragtag selves and we can get better. Unfortunately, the church doesn't function well enough sometimes to allow that to happen. So that's why I'm always pushing for the church to step up to the plate a little taller, because this is the place. This is the place where I know that people love me and they're not going to throw me away because I'm a mess. So I can come in, that's how it should be, rather than I gotta get it together because I'm going to church. No, I'm going to church and I'm going to get it together because there are going to be people there that are going to help me find the bubble gum and stick myself back together, And so, I mean, think about that, so yeah, we work on these things together, theoretically anyway, because we are family and we're held together because of God's love and our love for each other, so we can face anything. And that's why we say at the Center for Racial Healing, it's a brave space where the truth can be told. Because if we tell the truth, I mean, we claim that we believe that if we tell the truth, it'll set us free. But it's funny to make that claim and then spend a lifetime lying to ourselves about stuff and creating these false narratives for ourselves instead of telling ourselves the truth. So I just really believe that there's so much potential for us to get to a place where we can be together and not have to be performing. We can be together and just be who we are and just tell each other the truth. And that we can be accepting of where we all are and let people be wounded some. You don't have to be a perfect white person because I'm your friend, and I don't have to be a perfect Black person. We're just two people trying to figure out how to be human beings together on the planet and care about each other. And we're committed to each other and walking together. I mean, that's the world I want to live in, where that's what we're doing. And we get off of some of this judging and accusing and holding each other to standards that we can't live into ourselves, because we do too much of that in the church and out of the church. And I just think that race gets so entwined in all of that. And then we end up just playing with each other about being really in relationship. And I'm pretty sure God is hoping that we'll figure it out. I believe that. So,
can you talk a little more about your own church journey? Because I remember reading in Living into God's Dream the powerful story about your having been turned away, and then what happened on the road after that.
Yeah, that story. Yeah, I have loved Jesus since I was a little girl, and so that's what keeps me going. The church can be problematic at times, but Jesus is never a problem, first of all. And so I lived in Macon, Georgia for a while, and people maybe don't know Georgia, but Macon is like way different from Atlanta, and still is actually. And so one Sunday morning, I went to this church. It was a Christian. It was called Northside Christian Church, and I did not know that it was a segregated church, because to tell you the honest truth, it was in the 70s and I wasn't thinking about churches being segregated in the 70s. And so, but when I got there, I was waiting for them to finish something they were doing so I could go in. And this group of 10 guys walked up, the whole line of them came up to me to inform me, to ask me what I was doing there, which is such a strange question to be asked when you're standing in a church on Sunday morning. The assumption should be that you're coming to church, you would think anyway. But I said, well, I have some friends who invited me here to church, and they told me I didn't have any friends there. And because they assume that I'm Black, I can't have any white friends. So, and it just so happened, my friends didn't even know I was coming, and they weren't even there that Sunday. So So then they kept looking at me like they needed another explanation. And so I said to them, well, tell me what's the matter? Don't you let Black people come to this church? And they said, no, we don't. Hmm. And so then I just turned and walked out because, you know, like I wasn't trying to start a revolution that day anyway. I was just trying to go to church. And so I went out and got in my car and I rolled up the windows and burst into tears and locked the doors because nobody had actually ever thrown me out of, nobody had ever thrown me out of any place, even though I'd done some protesting and stuff earlier in my life. And but you know, this is the thing that keeps me going. I drove out of their driveway and was going down the road, and this one deer ran out of the woods, and I had to stop because you know when you see a deer, you're glad you saw it, so before you hit it. And as I stopped for the deer to cross the road, another one came right out behind it, and another one right behind it. And when the third one came out, it was almost as if something just took over my head and said, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Mm. And then I just sat there for a second and thought, here is God's affirmation to me that God is bigger than what just happened to me. And that is the thing that keeps me going, understanding that God is bigger in the world and in my life than whatever the external stuff is that's not good. And I have held on to that image for all these years as affirmation about that. And it's a very sad story that a group of people gathering in God's name would tell one of God's children, you're not welcome here. Mm-hmm. And we have all kinds of ways to tell people they're not welcome. So, you know, we don't need to get on a too high of a superiority horse about it, because we can do that in the Episcopal Church without even speaking. We can tell people they're not welcome. And I've had that experience as well. Not quite as in such a profound way, but with a kind of more subtlety around it. But when those things happen, then my job is to look for, where is God in this? So how is God taking care of me in this? So I don't end up in some place of being bitter. And so that's been a real important lesson. And that's also part of dealing with internalized depression and white supremacy, is to try to separate things so you don't end up just being angry and bitter. Because if you let that happen to yourself, then you bring even additional harm to your own psyche as a person of color. And that's an unfortunate byproduct, I think, that I see a lot of in our society. And that's a reason to be sad, and a reason to want Black and brown people to do their work as well, because we all have to work on how the wounds of racism have impacted us. So.
And that interplay of inner and outer work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking about this at St. Martin's and even in our outreach commission meeting last night, that the need for formation and transformation, kind of spiritually, you know, on an inner level, but also, especially right now, what feels like the urgency for outer change as well. Mm-hmm. And how what the rhythm of that is like, you know, in a parish where there's people at kind of all different places on the spectrum, some of whom, you know, aren't buying the whole notion of white supremacy, or, you know, how do you create opportunities for learning with such an urgency and such a need for the inner work as well?
Well, it's a challenge, and I'm glad that I don't have to be the parish priest, actually, but because I know that for folks who are still trying to wake up to what's really going on, they can be very resistive to seeing that. And for white people that don't believe that their white skin gives them privilege, can be it's hard sometimes to get them to see that and to wake up to that. But that is in fact a fact, and it has to happen one way or another. And I just think that you can't beat people over the head with that piece of truth. You just have to keep talking about it and circling around it in every kind of way you can. And if they're courageous enough to keep showing up for the conversation, then eventually there'll be some change, and it's long term. And when we have to have a little patience when we are working with folks, trying to get them to wake up. And I know, sometimes you just would like to pour a bucket of cold water on folks and say, don't you get it? But all that does is create more resistance if you're not careful. So it is a process. And I think that one of the things that I have found to be very effective is taking folks sort of like that who are willing to be willing to go on pilgrimages where they can encounter we took people to the Jonathan Daniels pilgrimage in Alabama. We've taken people to the Equal Justice Initiative. I know you all have got things in your region. You can't go right now, but you can go later. And sometimes just taking people into those environments where they have to confront some of these things and don't get to argue about it because it's just right there in front of them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that can be helpful, but it's a process. It is a process. Like everything is a process. And our job is to be vigilant. So just because somebody is resistant to this book or this film or this particular conversation doesn't mean they will always be resistant. And if they keep showing up, then eventually they will see better because if they don't want to see ever, they'll quit showing up. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the reason why we quit talking in the church is because we're afraid too many people might quit showing up. But the truth is that the folks who are really trying to wake up will keep showing up, even though they may be difficult to deal with. And I have seen such miraculous things happen in people who kept showing up and were accepted and respected, and yet people kept telling them the truth. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, because sometimes you just want to say, well, forget it. I'm throwing my pearls here in front of the swine, and there's no sense in continuing. Well, you have to be careful coming to that conclusion, because you don't ever know which day is going to be the day that actually we'll see. And so you just kind of keep at it with your teaspoon sitting by the ocean with your little bucket thinking, well, I can dip this ocean dry. Well, you look really silly when you're trying to do that, but you just don't know what might happen if you keep on being faithful. So that's kind of my attitude about it is, okay, particularly if I'm going to do this work, I've got to be faithful, and I've got to not be thin-skinned about it. And I've got to be able to abide people's resistance and not take it personally. And sometimes it's hard not to take it personally, but if you take it personally, you get into deep trouble yourself.
It's such a long game, I guess. Yes. We're getting ready to launch a pilot of Sacred Ground, the Katrina Brown's film and dialogue series. She's one of the creators, I guess. And so one of our facilitators, who's also part of our Justice League at St. Martin's, has been reading some of the materials. And one book she was reading was Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Joy DeGruy. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but DeGruy. This was a line from 2005. Contemporary police killings and the trauma it creates are reminiscent of the racial terror lynchings in the past. Impunity for state violence has resulted in the current human rights crisis and must be addressed as a matter of urgency. And so her question is, why did it take so long to wake up to that? That's 15 years ago. And of course, I mean, that's not that long ago in the whole history of all of this. But it's remarkable and chilling kind of how we can go back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Some
And the
of us.
fact of the matter is we didn't even wake up yet. You know, I mean, there's a lot of waking up happening, but there's still an awful lot of waking up to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And for folks who think that they're already awake, that's also a problem. So, you know, I don't think racism is going to disappear from the earth. I think we're going to get better at saying you're not welcome and resisting it. I think that it's about resistance. It's all of this is about daily resistance. Every day you get up with a determination to go into the world and be a light. You go into the world as a person who's following Jesus, and that's what it's about. I mean, it's not about necessarily that everything gets perfect because you did this work. You know, I think we can do something about a lot of the stuff that needs to be changed, and we have done something about some of it. But I'm not looking to create utopia here. I'm looking for doing my part to make space for beloved community to be born. And when God gets tired enough of it, perhaps God will do something to make it perfect. I don't know. And that's sort of not part of my job description here to worry about that. But it's a daily lifetime commitment of this is the way I'm going to be in the world. And part of the way I personally want to be in the world is to resist darkness, to resist negativity, to resist dehumanization, to resist being on a train that's marginalizing people, and to just live in that space and to fight for making it a world where other people will join me, and that will be that energy will be more pervasive than the negative energy. But it's a daily journey, and right now I feel like a lot of folks, because so much stuff is happening, a lot of people feel really that they need to come up with quick answers and make things better. Mm-hmm. Well, I think they need to sit somewhere under a tree and be still for a while. And be quiet. And it's sort of like, if they always say that if you get to the eye of a hurricane, it's quiet. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to go to the eye of the racial hurricane and sit for a bit to see what it is that we need to do, because there's all this flailing around to try to come up with some way to make things a little bit better isn't going to be very productive. And some things do need to get better sooner rather than later, but we need to know which ones we're being asked to work on, and mm-hmm. not just have these knee-jerk responses that'll fizzle out. If we get too much into all that, in 6 months we won't be doing anything, because we will have run the course of our reactionary energy, and then we just won't be doing anything, and that's not a good thing. I mean, we need to be paying real attention so that we're getting real messages, so that we get on a pathway that's sustainable, and that we start understanding that this is a lifetime call. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't feel like there's 10 new things I need to go do. I just need to keep being vigilant, which I've been doing for like a whole lot of years, and I need to keep doing that. I'm not trying to see what new project can I do. I mean, the center is doing its work, and we're doing some work around reimagining policing, because that's a good thing for us to be talking about. But it's not like we've got to stop just jumping into the pool before we understand what we're jumping into, and that we need to jump into it. We need to walk into it with our eyes wide open, and the commitment to stay there till we get some work done.
I think it was in something you had written announcing that new initiative. You said we humans can't seem to help ourselves. We look for simple answers to complex problems, mm-hmm. soundbite answers that end up creating more divisions. So yes. That tendency to jump.
Yes, and we would quick answers. We've got this issue that requires a lot of thoughtfulness and deep reflection, and we want to just come up with something, a soundbite about it. So and a soundbite becomes a hashtag, and before we know it, we think we solved the problem. And it's if it wasn't so pitiful, it would be funny.
Right.
You know.
I'm interested, we've been talking a lot about the church, but this work is going on in other organizations, nonprofit organizations and workplaces and schools. And if you have any insights in terms of how some of, what your work has been can translate into those other realms.
Well, so the specific, the work that we do is geared toward the church because we are the center in the Episcopal Church. We do have the Dismantling Racism curriculum for grades 6 through 12. And I just actually, Church Publishing has published our Leader's Guide and our journal that goes with it for the children to work with. And so from now on, after people have done the original mandated training, then they are eligible to train for a day to use our curriculum. And we're getting ready to work that out so we can do some of it virtually, particularly during this pandemic. And then once they've done our training, they can they'll get a code that allows them to order the materials from Church Publishing. We're very proud of that curriculum that is good to use with, well, we say 6th to 12th graders. If you're using it with 12th graders, you might have to tweak it a little bit. I don't know. I've not taught it but it's gone really quite well. So, and that could be used. It's designed for Sunday school and retreats and things like that. But a really good teacher in like a school setting could adapt it, I'm sure, to using with their students. A lot of the Dismantling Racism training workshops that we do, we have had people come that weren't associated to the Episcopal Church, that came from just the work world, the corporate world, because they wanted to learn more. They wanted to enlighten themselves. So that's a good thing. But our work is mostly designed to be done with people of faith and not in corporate settings. It's not going to be the kind of corporate kind of quote sensitivity kind of training thing. I think that workplaces need to be on record as having zero tolerance for racial expressions of racism. I think that every workplace, that the people there need to figure out a way to work on racism and make it clear that it's not going to be tolerated. So if you can't make everybody not be racist, because there'll be somebody who is in any setting if you've got more than 3 people, but you can make it clear that you need to keep yourself in check. And so whatever people can learn to bring to helping to make that happen, then I think that's a good thing. So I would, want to encourage folks, if they're teachers or working in just the corporate world, to whatever they learn, wherever they learn things about this, to think about themselves as resistors. That's who we are in the world. We're warriors, we're resistors. And so if you are in a workplace setting and you're trying to be a conscious human being and a faithful human being, and people are telling jokes that are racial slurs, you have a responsibility to do something about that. Mm-hmm. So taking responsibility for yourself in every setting is one of the big steps in being a well person, being healed, and practicing that healing outside of the church setting. So I just think that it's really important to pay attention that way. And there are lots of good secular resources and organizations that do this work, and they're good. And I don't have any negative things to say about them for the corporate world. I did have a lot to say about them for the church, because I thought the church ought to do its work differently. Mm-hmm. So, there's no shortage of resources, and you can be sure there's not going to be any shortage 6 months from now when everybody gets on the bandwagon to create even more stuff. So I think I think that people will be able to find really good curriculum materials to help them um, put together things that they can use outside of the church if they're seeking to find those kinds of things.
We're coming up on the anniversary of the Charleston shootings 5 years ago next week. Week from today, actually, I guess. And I was moved to see in your book, you quoted your son, who after that happened said, "Mama, it is so hard to be Black in America."
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on, as a mother of Black sons, and also when you talked in your Finding Brave Space about George Floyd's one of his last words being "Mama," and invited us to kind of call on that protective energy that is associated with mothers, but not limited to mothers.
Right. In the archetypal world, bear energy is associated with mama energy. And you ask my sons and they'll tell you I've got plenty of it for them, and always have had and still do, even though they're 30, 34 and 39. They are such a joy, my sons are. And yet I live with, it's a little bit of a low grade anxiety because they are young Black men in this country. And so it doesn't rise exactly to the level of fear, but it's sort of, I like to think of it in terms of, if you've ever had a toothache, that as it was starting, you kind of have a sense that you're a little bit out of kilter, as Sojourner Truth would say. It's something is nagging at you just a teeny bit. You're just not quite, you're just a little on edge, or you have a slight headache that people that I've known who have migraines will say they can tell when it's coming on. It's not there yet, but it takes something. It takes the edge off of your energy and off of you. That's the way Black parents live with every day, and more, that's the case. And even children are internalizing some of that anxiety. So, and when I was a kid, it was full-blown fear that somebody would do something to my brother and my father. So it's an everyday companion, the concern about the safety of my own children and the young people that I care about and know about. And I saw a sign on a little boy was carrying, "Will I be next?" Which just breaks my heart. I don't want children to have to be scared, and I don't want my children to have to be scared. My youngest son, who's 34, said to me the other day, "I just think maybe I should just stay in the house for a while." Just he's gotten past that, but that's a source of great pain, and you just have to hold it in your heart and give them to God and go forward, or else you get immobilized and you can't get up. So that's what I've done for all of their lives. I've trusted that they'll be okay, and thanks be to God, they've been okay. But it's not, I don't feel like we are exempt from the possibility. So I'm not naive enough to be thinking, well, my kids are going to be okay, and I don't have to care, I don't have to worry. Yes, I do have to be concerned, and I do have to hold the uneasiness that other mothers hold, and I also have to hold the faith that they'll be okay. And that's it's really hard. Those paradoxical things are really the things that get you. Right. Because we really want to camp out somewhere. So I want to camp out over here in just full-blown fear, or camp out over here in full-blown faith. And I get asked to be in the middle somewhere. So I got a little fear and I got a little faith, and they kind of walk along together. And real white allies are people who can walk in that space with me without trying to fix it. Mm-hmm. Because my children have they had three sets of godparents actually, and two of the sets were white. And one of their white godmothers is just a genius at just walking with us in our Blackness without commentary, without anything. I mean, just in absolute connection to us, but yet without words, because the words are worthless. Really, it's like, you know, somebody's baby just died and you're the priest and you know how worthless words are. Yeah. Well, they're worthless. So, but presence is everything. To have somebody be there with you and walk alongside you and experience the pain with you without trying to do anything about it. That is one of the best gifts that somebody can give to you. And as a Black mother in the United States, I'm so grateful to have a handful of people who are white, who are able to do that with me and my sons and deeply care about us and present with us. And that's what we should be doing as people of faith together, holding each other that way so that we have a sense of we're not alone. And my son who said that it's so hard to be Black, did an hour-long commentary about that some weeks ago on Facebook, and his name is Mbai. So if people want to go look around on Facebook, they may find that commentary that has just been viewed like thousands of times now, because it's just such a fine statement. And yet he knows that, but he gets up every day and goes and walks his dog, and he lives his life, and he does all the things he can do because his choice is to do that and live his life, or to be immobilized and stay in the house, or to hate people, which immobilizes you even more. So, and we refuse to let the external world of racism run our lives. You know, we know it's there, we live with it, we embrace it, we resist it, but it's not gonna run our lives.
Well, may we all be those kind of allies to you and to others doing this work. And as you say, presence is everything, and we are so grateful for your presence with us tonight. I wonder if we could just end with a few moments of silence to sort of give thanks for everything that we've shared and heard, and for your work, and then maybe you'd end us with a prayer.
So Lisa, that would be very fine with me. And the prayer that the thing that I would like to use for prayer is a poem by David Wagner called Lost. It's a very beautiful affirmation. And I think that these words are better than any I could think of. So I'd like to use them.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay. So I would just say one quick word, that this comes out of the Native American tradition, where this is a grandfather answering his grandson, who asks, "What do you do when you're lost in the forest?" And this is the reply: "Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No two trees are the same as to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you." Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Blessings on you and your work.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Good night, everyone.